after this meeting. So I was going to say, folks on Zoom, you might see that pop up. Thank you so much. And we also do have some sign-in sheets tonight too, which Grace can start to pass around. If folks want to sign in, they can sign up for our online email list where it sends out periodic updates on the project as well. So if folks are interested in doing that, they're more than welcome to. Folks on Zoom as well, we can send a link in the chat where you can sign up for those updates. Okay, great. So I guess just for a show of hands, for folks in the room, is there anyone here, this is their first meeting or first time they've come to one of these? Okay, great, thank you. So tonight we are going to do a little bit of a different overview. Typically we run through a lot of the project components. Over these last meetings, we've had monthly meetings here at the Osterville Library and over Zoom since about November, once a month. And we've gotten a lot of questions from folks. And so tonight what we're going to do is we have some experts with us, we have some of our consultants with us, and we're actually going to talk through some of those do a deeper dive on some of those questions that we've gotten in meetings. So we will do a brief overview of the project at the beginning, but not as deep of one we've done in our typical meetings before. So just wanted to give everyone that context. So just so folks on Zoom know, we are going to be doing Q&A at the end of this. So you can ask questions by submitting them to the Q&A function throughout the meeting. And then also when we go into Q&A, you can also raise your hand. And we have Steve on our team on Zoom, so he'll be managing that. All right, so as I mentioned tonight, we're going to be doing a briefer overview of the project than we typically do. And then we're going to dive into some of the topics that folks have had questions about. So those include cumulative financial benefits to the town of Barnstable, environmental protections and compliance, our construction schedule and what beach access will look like during that time, electric and magnetic fields, underground cable temperature, and our horizontal directional drilling construction process and Cape Cod's aquifer. And then we'll get right into Q&A. So first, just want to do a quick introduction of our team. I'm not going to go through everyone here because we have quite a few team members, both in person tonight and over Zoom. You probably recognize most of us from our pictures here that are in the room. So we have not only some of our team members here from Avangrid, but as I mentioned, also some of our consultants and experts working on various parts of the project with us. So to start, I'm going to give a little bit of context about what project we're talking about tonight and some other projects that folks may have heard of or have come to other open houses for. So Avangrid currently is working on 4 offshore wind projects. 3 of them are south of Martha's Vineyard, so about 20 miles south of Martha's Vineyard and over 40 miles south of the coast of Barnstable. Those 3 are highlighted in those 3 colored sections. So this lease area is the lease area defined by the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM. And so our first project, we have 50% ownership of with an organization. So Avangrid owns 50% and the other 50% is owned by an organization called Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. That's Vineyard Wind 1. So folks are probably pretty familiar with that project. That's the one that's currently laying their submarine cable. Folks may have seen some of the big ships out in Nantucket Sound. So that project is currently under construction. Their lease area, it's a little hard to see. Sorry, I can try and move this briefly. It's this teal shape up here. So that's that furthest north lease area. So that project is currently under construction. The next project is Park City Wind. So that's that middle section, that middle lease area. That's 100% owned by Avangrid and is currently in development and permitting. And then third down, so the furthest south section of that lease area is Commonwealth Wind. That's the project we're here to talk about tonight. That is also 100% owned by Avangrid and is also currently in development and permitting. And then our 4th project that we're working on is called Kitty Hawk Wind. It's not shown on the map because it's all the way down off the coast of North Carolina. And that is also 100% owned by Avangrid and is also currently in development.
Is it brand new?
The Kitty Hawk project?
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure of the timeline on that one. It's brand new.
Brand new, yeah. Never heard of Kitty Hawk. Is that a new project?
It's not a new project. No, we've had the lease area since 2017 and it's in the development phase.
So sorry for folks on Zoom, I will be better with passing the mic. So the question was, is the Kitty Hawk Wind project new? And Avangrid's had the lease area since 2017.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a project overview of the Commonwealth Wind project, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. Sorry to move this again. Folks on Zoom can't see this, but I'll make this little box.
Minimize that, Rachel. So minimize thing. Here you go.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well done, Pat.
So what you are seeing here is Commonwealth wind. As I said, this is the furthest south little section of this lease area. And then in orange, you will see our cable route. So the electricity will come from the turbines through that cable route and will be landing in Barnstable, interconnecting with the ISO New England grid at the West Barnstable Eversource substation. So the capacity of this project is 1,200 megawatts. Again, it's 100% owned by Avangrid. The project lease area, so again, that section where our actual physical turbines will be, is over 40 miles south of the Barnstable. And we anticipate our commercial operations, kind of starting of everything, turbine spinning, in 2028. And finally, I just want to go over a quick more stats of this project. And, you know, this project being 1,200 megawatts, kind of what that means is it will generate enough power for the ISO New England grid to power approximately 700,000 homes in Massachusetts, homes and businesses. Additionally, this clean energy will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2.35 million US tons per year, which is about the equivalent of taking a little under half a million cars off the road every year. In addition, this project will bring about 11,000 direct jobs to folks here in Massachusetts. So those are some of our environmental and energy statistics. And so now that's kind of our brief project overview. Again, if folks have questions, we can take them at the end, but we really want to dive into these deep kind of topic areas that folks have had questions on since we've been doing these open houses. So for the first one, I'm going to pass this off to Kim Kimmel for what are the cumulative financial benefits to the project from the town of Barnstable.
Thanks, Rachel, and good to see everyone again tonight. I'll get right into this topic, but I did want to pause just to underline that 1,200 megawatts just for a moment, because it gets lost in the shuffle. This is the largest clean energy project in all of New England. This is one of the largest greenhouse gas reduction projects that we have anywhere in New England, anywhere in the country. And so it really is an extremely important project for the Commonwealth, for the region, and for our country to really take a stand and come up with alternatives to climate change. So that 1,200 megawatts is just, it is a very large contributor to our effort to deal with climate change. In terms of the financial benefits, could you go to the next slide? Or I can do it, yeah.
That's supposed to.
We've talked about these benefits before, but we haven't done a slide that shows the cumulative economic benefit of all three projects, and also that unpacks what the different elements of those benefits are. So I thought I'd just spend a minute on this. I do want to say that the Vineyard Wind 1 numbers are actual numbers that we have on our books. The other two projects are estimates. They could be higher, they could be a little lower, but they give you a basic range. And so what you're seeing in these projects is, first of all, host community payments to the town. Those numbers are known for Vineyard Wind 1 and Park City Wind. Those are $16 million. We are showing 24 million for Commonwealth because it's 3 cables rather than 2 cables. That 24 million is a number that Mark Ells has said in public. And although we don't have a host community agreement yet, we're assuming the number that the town manager has put out for the purpose of that calculation. There's also a second level of host community agreements that payments that we make after 25 years. And this is a 30-year projection, so we included those numbers as well, although they're not that significant. On top of the host community payments are the tax payments, which we've estimated. The town, again, may come back and say we're undervaluing. That's possible. We'll have a discussion about that. So those numbers could be higher, but these are the numbers that we're seeing. And if you take all three projects, you're at about $61 million. Oh, you're trying to get rid of that pesky thing? Yes, thank you. Good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, yes. In addition to the taxes paid to the town of Barnstable, we're going to be paying the Barnstable and West Barnstable Fire District taxes. We have estimates that we put in for that. Then we've tried to monetize the benefits of the sewer collaboration, the fact that we're going to be laying electric cable at the same construction season as the sewer, and we have certain obligations. And so those break down into a bunch of things. Some are in-kind services that we're providing to the town, like survey and design work. As some of you may know from Park City, we did something called ground penetrating radar so that we would know what's underneath the town, the roads. That's a service that we did for the electric line, but it's also extremely valuable for the town in terms of the sewer line. So we've tried to capture all of those benefits. As some know, we've also committed to replacing water lines as part of our project. So we have provided some monetary estimates of that. And then as people know, one of our commitments is when the combined work of the sewer and the electric cable are done, we've committed to do the final coating and repaving of the roadway. So that also has a number and we've calculated the value. Two things which we've left blank because they're really not known yet is what kind of local benefit contribution we might make to the communities of Centerville and to Osterville. That's still something we're very eager to discuss with people here. There'll also be streetscape improvements, both for Centerville and for Osterville. We've said that we'll pay the fair share of not only restoring, but making those roadways more attractive, better when we're done. We don't have a number for that. That's something that we'll be doing with the town, but it is a line item. And the bottom line is if you add up all these different projects and all these different components, you're talking about something in the range of $170 million over a certain period of time. Isn't this the hour that it advances?
It is.
Is there some reason it's not advancing?
You might have thrown us.
You might just need to click with the mouse and then advance. There you go.
There we go. So the other thing we did is what's called a net present value contribution, because $169 million over 25 years is not the same thing as getting all that money today. So we did a careful analysis. We looked at, we separated the types of financial benefits that are being paid in the next several years from those that are happening over a 25 or 30-year period. We used two discount rates. I'll explain what that is. But the bottom line is the net present value in 2023 of the financial commitments we're making to the town are somewhere between 110 and $123 million. That range depends upon what kind of a discount rate you use. We thought that 3 to 5% is a reasonable discount rate for a municipality. We can talk about that a little bit more. And I just want to highlight that's 110 to $123 million for a project that really isn't going to require much of anything in terms of town services or police or schools. So this is really a lot of additional revenue that we're going to pump right into the town of Barnstable. And I may say at a time when the town really needs that revenue. They're looking at a debt exclusion override for sewer, like a lot of municipalities. There were a couple of years where there was a lot of federal investment and funds, and those funds are starting to go away now, and communities are going back to where they once were, which is to be strapped. So we think that these economic benefits are real and quite substantial, and we're very proud to be a good neighbor here and to compensate the town for what we know is some temporary inconvenience in terms of the beach, in terms of the roads being dug up and whatnot. So I'm going to end there. I know we have a bunch of other experts that we're going to call up.
Thank you, Ken. And I just want to recognize Councilor Cusack. Thank you for joining us. So the next question that we wanted to cover was how will Avangrid protect the ecosystem surrounding the paved parking lot at Dowses Beach? So I'm going to invite Erin Parisi, who's our state permitting manager, to come up.
Thanks, Rachel. So we've heard from a lot of you that you have, major concerns with work at Dowses Beach. So I just wanted to point to this figure, which outlines some of the resource areas at Dowses Beach. And just reiterate that all of the work we're proposing, the HTV construction activity will be contained to the paved portion of the Dowses Beach parking lot. And then in addition to, remaining within that paved area, just wanted to talk a little bit about the numerous, permits that will regulate that work. So in addition to the general environmental review processes at the federal and state level, so via BOEM and the MEPA process, the work at Dowses Beach will require several federal, state, and local permits. So from a federal standpoint, the construction activity will require construction general permit from the US EPA, and that will regulate and oversee erosion and sedimentation controls, and it will oversee any stormwater discharges or dewatering at the site. It will require turbidity monitoring. At the state level, this activity will require or the in-water work for the HDD drilling will require a 401 water quality certificate from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. And those regulations, the 401 water quality regulations, will protect the surface water quality of Centerville Harbor. So that permit will include, several conditions, ensuring that surface water quality is maintained and turbidity is monitored. Sediments are tested for any contaminants. In addition, the work will require a local order of conditions from the Barnstable Conservation Commission. So although the work doesn't include any direct impacts to coastal wetland resource areas, it is within the buffer zone, so therefore an order of conditions is required. So some of the conditions that are typical in an order of conditions are sedimentation and erosion controls, as well as periodical inspections by the conservation agent from Barnstable. And then the next slide just goes over some, just the overall permitting processes that the project will require. And a few other things to mention is that Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program of Massachusetts will make a conditional, it's anticipated to make a conditional determination that there will be no take of rare species at the project site. So the Dowses Beach is rare species habitat to least tern and piping plover, but we'll design the project and the construction activity in a way that doesn't impact any of those birds. So that will include time of year restrictions, so avoiding any construction work during periods when least tern or piping plover are nesting in the area. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Erin. All right, so next we wanted to talk a little bit about what the construction of the project will look like, kind of an overview of the Dowses Beach parking lot area and the beach itself, and kind of as we look over the construction schedule, what that can look like. So I'm going to invite Ken Farrell from Stantec up for that, and Ken, I can click through your slides.
That would be great. Thank you.
I'll stay up.
Yeah. All right. Good evening, everybody. Next slide, please. So as Erin indicated, the subsea cables will be landing at Dowses Beach per the current design through a process called HDD. It's horizontal directional drilling. It's a technology that's been around for a long time. And the end result of the HDD is a roughly a 32-inch diameter, high density polyethylene and plastic type conduit that will extend from the Dowses Beach parking lot about 2,200 feet into the ocean, pop out in the seabed. It's technology that's been around a long time. And the construction, we had several criteria when trying to lay this out. First of all, first and foremost was to be mindful and to protect environmentally sensitive areas. So the way we've evaluated this and set it up would be to do all the construction work from the paved areas of the current parking lot, and to not do anything on the beach, not do anything within the environmentally sensitive areas of the beach, the coastal dunes, things of that nature. We had other criteria too. We know that the residents would like to have full-time access of the beach year-round, and we did our very best to try to ensure that, and not just the beach itself, but also the pier. That's at the very end of the parking lot. So this is a nice rendering that the project team had put together showing the current configuration. Pre-construction condition. Next slide, please. So this is the first sequence. This is putting in the first HDD in the southern part of the parking lot. So you can see at the lower portion there, just to the above where the boathouse is currently located, is where a drill rig will be set up. And that's basically the center of activity for the HDD operation. There's a series of skids that are affiliated with it, different pumps and fluid circulating components, control house, things of that nature. But for this particular scenario, as the southernmost, this is actually the northernmost HDD is going in, we've established on on the left-hand side of the image, a 12-foot wide driving corridor for the public. So although much of the parking lot will be barriered off to afford the construction activity, construction laydown, and things of that nature, the very far end will be accessible with parking for folks to be able to actually drive in, park their cars, and have access to the beach as well as access to the pier. So that's what it would look like during the first phase of the construction. Next slide is an interim condition. The work would be taking place essentially during the winter months, and the idea would be everything would be cleared off in the springtime, full access for the summer months into the fall. And so this is what it would look like after that first HDD gets installed. And as you'll notice, the parking lot would have been restored. Next slide. So then we get to the other two HDDs, and they're both conceptually similar. So as you'll notice, it's a pretty similar setup in terms of the construction components, construction equipment. In this particular scenario, you'll note that the area near the boathouse is directly accessible to the public. So folks could come into the parking lot, drive in, park their cars, and access the beach that way. Now, we also know that it was very important to folks to be able to get to the pier itself, and we did our very best to allow for that. So although we won't have places to park and we won't have a place for folks to actually drive to the pier, on the left-hand side of the image, you'll note that there's a 4-foot public access way that would allow for people to walk in. It's wide enough for wheelchairs to at least allow for when the top two HDDs are being installed, people can get to the pier. So that's what we did there. So next slide, please. HDD 3 is pretty much a very similar setup. The fence line would stay the same. By the way, sound barriers would be set up to quiet down construction equipment as best we can. We would use construction equipment with mufflers to try to minimize noise that way. So basically, the construction area would stay the same, just moves down the beach. Next slide. And then when it's all done, everything gets paved over. This is pretty much the same sequence that had occurred on Vineyard 1 for those of you familiar with Coles Beach.
The only other thing I would note too is just the what's historically left of the project, so the joint bays. So there won't be any physical impact.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Right. Ultimately, there's joint bays, something a device called the joint bay. It's basically an underground vault. What happens in the joint bays? We have our 12-inch diameter subsea cable will enter in one side, and then on the other side of the duct bank, the joint bay, we will have our land-based cable that will ultimately be routed up to the substation. The two of those get spliced up in the balls. And so when you walk in the parking lot, all you're going to see for each of the 3 bays is roughly a 3-foot by 3-foot access way. That's locked. The public can't get into it. So that's all that we see. Was there a hand up back there?
Yeah, how long is the duct station?
I'm sorry, sir?
How long lengthwise is that duct station?
The joint bay is roughly between 50 and 60 feet long. And it's completely underground.
3 feet wide, 60 feet long.
It's about, it's a little bit bigger than that. It's roughly 6 foot wide by 6 foot tall by about 50 to 60 feet long, completely underground.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
So next one, which I know folks have had a lot of questions on, is what are the health impacts from the project on electric and magnetic fields? I'm going to introduce Chris Long. And Chris, if you mind giving an introduction to your background.
Sure.
I think so. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Long. I'm a principal with Gradient, which is an environmental and health science consulting company based in Boston. I have a background in public health and toxicology, including a doctorate in environmental health from the Harvard School of Public Health. I've been with Gradient about, I guess, a little over 20 years now. I've been working in the area of electric and magnetic fields, or EMF, for much of the time, close to 20 years that I've been at Gradient. Gradient was hired by Avangrid as the EMF consultant for the New England Wind 2 connector project. We've also worked with Avangrid, with the Vineyard Wind folks on other projects. I think going back to about 2014 now, so almost 10 years. There we go. I'm going to provide a brief introduction to electric and magnetic fields, or EMF, in case there are people that aren't familiar with the term and the sources. As indicated on the slide, electric and magnetic fields are invisible lines of force produced by anything that generates, transmits, or uses electricity. Electric fields are produced by voltage, while magnetic fields are produced by the flow of electricity or electrical current. There's some key differences between electric and magnetic fields, and they include the following: how the field strengths are expressed. They're different units for electric fields and for magnetic fields. Electric fields are expressed as kilovolts per meter typically, while common units for magnetic fields are milligauss. Another key difference is that electric fields are easily shielded by conducting objects, including building walls, vegetation, the ground, while magnetic fields are not shielded by most materials. This is important for this project because the electric fields produced by the voltage on the offshore export cables will be contained within the cables due to the grounded metallic sheathing around the conductors. There will also be no above ground electric fields from the underground onshore transmission cables, as they'll be blocked by cable components, the duct bank, and the ground as well, so that there are no above ground electric fields from a buried transmission cable. One important thing that electric and magnetic fields have in common with each other is that they decrease very rapidly in strength as you move away from their source. As indicated on the slide, we all encounter power frequency, electric and magnetic fields on a routine basis in our daily lives. As common sources include the above ground and underground distribution lines in the streets where we live, residential drop lines that bring electrical service into our homes, household wiring, as well as household appliances. This graphic shows the electromagnetic spectrum. As you can see on the graph, as indicated by the green box on the far left, power frequency, electric and magnetic fields associated with alternating current, AC power transmission are an extremely low frequency, specifically 60 hertz, and are thus a very low energy form of non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation. Power frequency, electric and magnetic fields are not a form of ionizing radiation, meaning they don't have enough energy to break molecular bonds and damage DNA, biological cells or tissues. They don't carry enough energy even to heat cells and tissues. Power frequency EMFs have a far lower frequency and consequently a far smaller amount of energy than other components of the electromagnetic spectrum that include visible light, the infrared radiation emitted by the human body in the form of radiated heat, and forms of ionizing radiation like X-rays. Power frequency EMFs are often referred to as being extremely low frequency, given the location in the lower part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and also to distinguish them from other components of the electromagnetic spectrum. So just a key takeaway that I can't emphasize enough is that power frequency EMFs are not a form of ionizing radiation. Potential health risks from power frequency EMFs have been heavily researched and scrutinized for over 4 decades now. Science cannot prove that any human endeavor is absolutely safe, but despite more than 4 decades of scientific study and more extensive scientific knowledge available than for most chemicals, there are no confirmed health consequences of long-term exposure to power frequency EMFs, including increased risk of cancer. As illustrated by this slide, this is the consensus opinion of prominent international scientific health and safety organizations and public health organizations, including the World Health Organization, or WHO, the US EPA, and the National Cancer Institute. I'm not gonna read everything that's here in this slide. In a couple slides, I'll provide some web resources if you want to go and read it yourselves. But I would like to share some of the specific conclusions reached by the World Health Organization, or WHO. On the website for its international EMF project, WHO states, the main conclusion from the WHO reviews is that EMF exposure is below the limits recommended in the ICNIRP international guidelines. And ICNIRP stands for the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. Below the limits recommended in the ICNIRP international guidelines do not appear to have any known consequence on health. WHO further concluded on a question and answer webpage that they have, despite the feeling of some people that more research needs to be done, scientific knowledge in this area is now more extensive than for most chemicals. Based on a recent in-depth review of the scientific literature, the WHO concluded that current evidence does not confirm the existence of any health consequences from exposure to low-level electromagnetic fields. However, some gaps in knowledge about biological effects exist and need further research.
Question.
Yes.
What you're talking about here is not what's going under the cables here. It's gotta be 12,000 megawatts, which has never been studied. And it's never been produced in the United States. So what does that matter when you haven't had any data on what's happening here?
This is directly applicable.
No, it's not.
It's 60 hertz AC power transmission. The voltages, I mean, the cables are going to be 275 kV. Those types of cables have been, and the magnetic fields associated with them have been extensively studied.
Everything cable of high velocity under the earth here, going through the town, and the temperatures that they're going to reach. I have a study right here from England about the temperatures that they reach. And there's not been any study in the temperatures of these cables. So because it's not been produced.
There will be,
Yeah.
we have someone here who's gonna talk about the temperature.
Yeah, temperature is a different topic.
No, we're gonna talk about temperature in a little bit. But Chris, you've done some actual modeling of this project.
Yes, and
So-
that's actually the
Yeah.
topic for the next slide.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This
temperature,
is background. Now we're gonna apply it to this project.
yes, and I will jump to that. See, yeah. Gradient performed a modeling analysis to assess the magnetic field levels that we've generated by the onshore and offshore transmission cables. We prepared a report which will be made publicly available in the coming months in a submission to the Massachusetts Energy Facilities Siting Board. I'd like to share a few highlights from our modeling analysis. They're summarized on this slide. We conducted modeling to predict above ground magnetic field levels for a comprehensive set of landfall and onshore transmission cable installation scenarios. The modeling incorporated several conservative assumptions intended to err on the side of over predicting typical magnetic field levels. These assumptions included using cable current loadings based on the maximum wind turbine output. In other words, 100% capacity for the wind farm. All modeled above ground magnetic field levels for the landfall and onshore transmission cable installation scenarios are below health-based exposure guidelines for public exposure to power frequency magnetic fields, including in particular the ICNIRP guideline endorsed by the WHO. The modeling analysis also demonstrated the rapid decrease in above ground magnetic field levels with increasing distance away from the cable locations, including 80% and greater reductions in magnetic field levels at lateral distances of 25 feet from the duct bank center lines across the different installation scenarios. I'd like to lastly note how mitigation of magnetic fields was factored into the design of the onshore transmission system. Burying onshore transmission cables underground is a form of mitigation for EMFs because number one, underground lines produce no above ground electric fields due to shielding by cable components, by the duct bank, by earth. And then number two, The cable conductors can be placed closer together for underground cables than for overhead lines, which increases the degree of self-cancellation of magnetic fields. I'd be happy to answer questions at the end, but
Okay, sure.
yeah, that may be a
I was
better
gonna say,
approach.
folks, we have 2 more questions to get through and then we'll jump right into Q&A, but I think those may also answer some of the questions folks have.
Great, this is the last slide. I'd like to, as I mentioned, I'd like to point to several reputable websites with additional information on power frequency, electric and magnetic fields, and health effects research and conclusions. These include websites for the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, the National Cancer Institute, US EPA, the World Health Organization, the American Cancer Society, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and Pacific Northwest National Laboratory.
And we'll share these around with folks as well for anyone who wants to see this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and so to the question of temperature, the next question we wanted to tackle, because we know folks have questions on it, Ken, if you don't mind, speaking to kind of the question of what is the temperature of the cable and the underground utility infrastructure?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So just to back up a little bit, we talked in previous meetings about how the cable's installed. It's installed in a duct bank. So we've got these cables, they're about 3 inches in diameter, and there's going to be a total of 9 of them. In each cable, which it's similar to the cable in your house, it's got a copper conductor and a series of insulation and wrappings on it. Of course, it's a lot more elaborate and much more robust than what you have in your homes. So that cable sits inside of high-density polyethylene conduit, about 8 inches in diameter. And all those conduit are encased in a thermal concrete duct bank that will be underground. The depth of the duct bank will range between 3.5 feet and about 8 feet, depending on the presence of underground utilities. So to the cable, the actual cable itself, copper portion of it, has a continuous rating of 90 degrees C, 90 degrees C. That's the temperature of the copper. And to put that in context, that's about the temperature of a hot cup of coffee, okay, 90 degrees C. And that's a standard through the industry. The design that we're using here is pretty much a standard design that any underground transmission route in Massachusetts, New England, or the US would invoke. So 90 degrees C is a very, very common number.
Meaning Celsius.
Celsius, yes, sir. Sorry about that.
How much is Fahrenheit?
Sorry,
How much is Fahrenheit?
that is 194 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
194. Yeah. Let's forgive me, electrical codes were always in degrees C. Going forward, I'll give you both numbers. Oh, great. So even though the cables are quote unquote designed to continuously operate at 90 degrees C, they actually are capable of withstanding 105 degrees C, which is 221 degrees Fahrenheit. So we have a very robust design. The cables will never see that temperature, but they're designed to accommodate it if need be. The way that circuits will be set up is that temperature will be continuously monitored within the cable for the life of the project, roughly 30 years or so. So how does heat dissipate? So basically, heat will get dissipated through the cable installation, which is something called cross-linked polyethylene. There's the cable jacket, there's the HDPE conduit, the thermal concrete of the duct bank, thermal backfill that will surround the duct bank, and then finally the soil itself. So when you're walking over the duct bank, you won't know it's there. The surface temperature of the paving that is over the duct bank is equivalent to ambient air temperature of that season. I think that answers the question.
Thank you, Ken. And I believe our final one might be you as well.
Yeah, come back.
Sorry about that. So our final one is, I know folks have had questions about the HPD itself and kind of how that process works in relation to Cape Cod Offshore.
Sure. So we, the company did a series of geotechnical borings throughout the Dowses Beach area and also the duct bank area. And we have on staff a credentialed hydrogeologist, 30 years experience. He's actually on the phone with us now. And he evaluated the data. And the long story short, is that the sediments around Dowses Beach that were observed from these geotechnical reports, I'm going to read it, are not sufficiently saturated permeable material that will yield significant quantities of water. So what that means is that the aquifers that serve the public drinking water of the residents here, the wells, the aquifer itself, they're about a mile and a half from this area. So anything going on down at the beach would not migrate saltwater into the public drinking supply of Osterville for our review.
Did you want to just comment on both on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe this question was also raised during the, so BOEM recently finished up on the 21st, so this past Tuesday. 21st, a comment period for the DEIS, which is the draft environmental impact statement. So that is a permitting process run at the federal level by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And so they hosted 3 public hearings as part of that. You could submit comments online, and they also had 3 public hearings via Zoom where they went over the project in detail. And the question was raised again on this, and the BOEM officials mentioned, in their response to that question, that the HPD work is too shallow to impact Cape Cod aquifer at that space, which I believe kind of speaks to Ken's point as well.
If the aquifer goes out past the beach where you want to drill down to. But the aquifer extends out the beach right in the town's bylaw. And you're gonna drill 30 feet down and you'll have a high risk of piercing the aquifer.
So there's an aquifer everywhere on Cape Cod. It extends
Well,
throughout the
we
whole.
know that this goes
May
out-
I finish? The question is whether it affects the drinking water supply. And the point is, it's so far away. And the nature of the soils are such that anything that happened there isn't going to migrate to the public drinking water well. So yes, the whole Cape Cod is a sole source aquifer. It all needs to be protected. It is protected, but not every inch of that aquifer is used to serve either public or private drinking water supplies. And that's the issue.
Once you pierce it, it's gone.
It's not a balloon that you pierce.
Well, it's.
It's a body of water.
I
and the
know
question-
salt water getting into the aquifer.
Well, but what BOEM said is really important. At the depth that we're doing that drilling.
You were just doing the drilling at the causeway. We're not talking about the drilling you're gonna do off the beach.
Yeah,
It's 2 different things.
yeah, in any event,
And you're gonna go.
not deep enough to get to the aquifer, and even if it did, there's no way in which that's gonna migrate to the drinking water wells, which is what,
The risk is too high.
well, the risk is, according to our hydrogeologist and the federal hydrogeologist who studied, the risk is 0.
We're not willing to take that risk.
It's 0.
Thank you, and we'll get back into question answer. I just want to go over two or three more slides with folks. So as folks know, we've been having these open houses monthly since November. I just wanted to throw the next couple of dates up on the slide. So we will be doing a virtual open house in March. We will be back here at the Osterville Library in April and May, and we will be holding a virtual meeting in June. We currently are scheduled through August as well. So I just want to take a moment to give a big shout out and thank you to the Osterville Library as well, and all the library staff that's been allowing us to use this space. And then the last slide I'll put up, and then we'll get into Q&A, because I know folks have more questions, is just Pat Johnson over there and my contact information. I know folks have been reaching out with other questions outside of these public hearings, so just wanted to have space for folks on Zoom and folks in the room to take that down if needed. I also have business cards out in front in a couple different places out at the tables as well, and this information is also on our website. Lastly, I do just want to mention as well, we do have a website for this project at commonwealthwind.com. You can find specific information about our landing here in Barnstable at commonwealth.com/Barnstable. More information about our current and future permitting processes at commonwealthwind.com/permitting. You can find more about our upcoming events, commonwealthwind.com/events. So just wanted to give that shout out before we jump into Q&A. So yeah, absolutely. And so our mic is not cordless, so I'm just going to repeat the question back.
I have a bunch of questions, but I know you can't get to them all at once, so I'll leave that to you or Pat. But I think it might be a good idea, particularly the person from Gradient, if instead of having an information session that covers everything, it would be nice to just sit down and say, okay, at this session, we're gonna talk about this, that, because these are very highly technical issues, and a lot of us aren't. So, I'd like to hear a lot of really interesting things to say, but I bet a lot of it went over at least my head.
Yeah.
You know, so if we could, you know, maybe have, you know, maybe gradient as an event or a meeting. And then something about the aquifers, all these issues that we're really concerned about. If we could have that as a top of the information session instead of everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's great feedback. And it's actually feedback we've heard. And I think as we are looking towards some of these summer meetings, I think, we can definitely think about understanding, right? We've been speaking for 47 minutes. Normally we try and get done in about 15, so we can jump to Q&A. So I think we could definitely look at having some focus meetings this summer. Thank you. And,
Rachel, can you stop screen sharing so folks on Zoom can see the whole room?
oh, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was wondering if any studies have been conducted on how this project might impact the marine wildlife within the range of the project, so maybe. If it's gonna disrupt any migration patterns for deep sea fish, if any crustaceans or local marine wildlife will be impacted at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is about studies that have been done or kind of environmental compliance or permanent around marine wildlife. So Erin, I don't know if you want to speak to kind of some of the specifics there. Sure. Yeah.
So a lot of those topics are covered through the BOEM review. So the DEIS, which just came out, the draft environmental impact statement was just published and the comment period actually just closed. They go over a lot of marine mammal impacts and as well as the Mass Environmental Policy Act Office environmental review process. So they take a look at water quality. And then, both of those processes require monitoring. So a benthic habitat monitoring plan will be developed. So it will compare, pre-construction versus post-construction work to benthic habitat. But I would definitely recommend looking at the BOEM DEIS for some helpful information on impacts to marine wildlife.
Yeah, if you don't mind. Another thing as well, so we don't have in here, but we also have specific fisheries management staff, and they do a lot of work on our kind of marine side of things. And so additionally, I need to keep listing out URLs, but we also have a fisheries page on our website. Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. I just wanted to introduce Christina Hoffman from our team as well. Steve, are you able to unmute Christina?
I think you did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Hi, everybody. This is Christina Hoffman. I'm the Director of Development at Avangrid Renewables, and I just wanted to add a little bit about your question, because it is a really good one about the marine life. And Erin did a great job describing that BOEM, really has sections dedicated to exactly those topics that are in the draft environmental impact statement that is out on the BOEM website. And in addition to that, as part of the federal permitting process, there are a number of agencies that are looking at specifically wildlife in the marine environment. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife is going to be reviewing the project. The National Marine Fisheries Service is also going to be reviewing marine impacts to marine wildlife. And that's everything from whales to codfish to, anything that's out there in the ocean. There's a Marine Mammals Protection Act that we have to comply with. There's a whole slew of federal regulations, and we have really just started the environmental review process at the federal level. That issuance of the draft environmental impact statement sort of kicked off a number of processes. They've been sort of in the planning stage for a couple of years, but there are a number of agencies that will be reviewing that. So I just wanted to give that context about all the different agencies that are reviewing those aspects as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Susie. I'm just having a tough time getting my head around the whole wildlife thing. This man brought up the marine life, and I just want to bring up the bird life and the plovers in particular. I'll just tell you the story. So years ago, I was walking on the beach with my 15-year-old blind dog, and the beach had been cordoned off to preserve the plovers from March until August that year, half the beach for the plovers. And there was a dog catcher there, or a natural resources person or somebody. And he came up to me and said, I'm gonna charge you federal charges for having your dog near the plover. And I thought, oh, this is great. And now all of a sudden we get the talk about the plovers are gonna be fine, and we don't have any takes. takes I preserve, I mean, is a word that means dead for us, right? Takes, which I think is really an unfortunate euphemism. But anyway, so I'm having a tough time getting my head around this whole, issue with Clover's gonna be fine. When, we have had our beach cordoned off for years for the probably one ship survived. Anyway,
No, absolutely. So just to repeat for you, so the question is about birds and other migratory species like that, very particular to the piping plover. So Erin, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to kind of the time management around that will be affecting our project specifically there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so as I mentioned previously, the project requires review through the Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program through the state of Massachusetts. So that really regulates rare species habitat within state jurisdiction, so like at Dowses Beach. So similar to what you're talking about, the piping plover protected area. So through that review process, we're anticipating, similar to the Vineyard Wind 1 project and the Park City 1 project, that will have time of year restrictions, which limits any construction activity between, generally May and September, because that's piping plover and least turn nesting period. So that's, we're happy to comply with that. We don't anticipate any construction activity during those, and that's stipulated through NHESP. In addition, on the federal side, they review, bird avian impacts associated with the wind turbine generators. So through the federal process, there'll be a separate bird and bat monitoring plan that will monitor any avian impacts, and mitigation measures will be identified through that federal process as well. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, Suzanne.
Yeah, speaking of the protected species, I know you've been reading all of the BOEM comments religiously, it appears. But one of the points our group made, was that your volume 2 of your construction and operations plan, upon which the BOEM's DEIS is based, was so heavily redacted that it was useless. And one of the things that was hidden from view, not only the executive summary, but a big section of volume 2, and redacted in its entirety, was a description of the protocols you were going to use to mitigate harm to protected species. And as I mentioned in my response to BOEM, why is the public not allowed to know what your mitigation protocols would be? That seems to me to be inexplicable.
So just for folks here on Zoom,
Christina.
I was gonna repeat, just to repeat the question a little bit. So that's about, again, the mitigation strategies for some of our species. Oh, definitely gonna stop that.
Definitely kill that.
Christina, go ahead.
Sure, yes, no, I understand where you're coming from, Suzanne, in terms of having that redacted. And, I think that BOEM might have an answer for you, in terms of putting that question to them and why certain sections are redacted. But the protection of marine life, as I said, we are just entering the permitting phase, with that issuance of the draft environmental impact statement. We are entering the permitting stage, and the regulatory agencies are working really hard to come up with what appropriate mitigation measures are going to be required. So we have proposed some. They might change those, alter them, propose other ones over the course of their review, which is going to continue on for many months. And so, one of my thoughts is that they don't list everything out necessarily, although there is quite a lengthy section on mitigation in the draft EIS. But those are all active points of discussion right now with multiple agencies.
Sure. I'm talking about the COP being redacted, your document, not BOEM's.
Christina, are you able to hear Suzanne?
Yes, I can. We can hear it really clearly. Yes, same exact answer. The mitigation measures that we have proposed might not be accepted by BOEM. And so they might get, modified, enhanced, changed over many months. And so really the final mitigation measures based on the experts at the federal agencies are what ultimately will be identified and made public.
Thank you, Tina. Sorry, sir, you had your hand up.
I actually had two questions, but I'll make them real quick. One was like the first job. My name is David. It's a process question. I've been at 2 meetings and then I tried to catch up with a videotape of the first meeting. But it moves along and there's more material. Do you think it would make any sense in a cooperative way, just to be able to get the facts, argue the things that should be argued, and don't argue the things that shouldn't be argued, to put some frequently asked question, cumulative document together that has everyone's worry and give you a chance to respond and give the group a chance to counter respond to your response and build this list so that people who come to the next meeting are not reinventing the wheel 3 meetings back, so to speak, and create some, kind of a cumulative frequently asked concern type document that gets the facts on the table, and we don't worry about the facts that are not to be worried about, but we worry about the other ones. That was a process question along the lines of what you kind of made me think of. The question I had was to you. You talked about the health situation relative to, does it affect cells? What about medical devices? What if I'm lying on the beach with a pacemaker right over where the cable is? Is there any kind of impact of the magnetic field on any kind of a medical device that's electromechanical or whatever?
Chris, if you don't mind, I'll address the first question, and if you want to come up to the mic for the Zoom for this again. So we do have an FAQ on the Barnstable page for the Commonwealth One website. I definitely agree. I think, a project I've actually been working on this week is updating that with a lot of the questions we've gotten over the last couple of weeks. So I definitely think, that's an FAQ on our website. We're looking to expand a lot of these things. So it's a really great point and well taken. Thank you.
One would allow the, point counterpoint, to it.
No, absolutely. I really appreciate it. And then, so just for folks in the room who weren't able to hear, the next question is about, so for, electrical magnetic field, what if I have, a medical device, a pacemaker, something like that, and I'm anywhere near any of those cables?
Rachel. Chris, before you answer that, Chris, since you're already up there, I'm a physician here in Osterville. The issue of electromagnetic radiation has been raised at least 2 or 3 times at previous meetings and tonight. The question that's been asked, which I don't think has been answered, is there any empirical data or research data with electrical currents even approaching what we're talking about here? The data that you presented earlier, to my understanding, does not cover any kind of electrical currents anywhere close to the 1,200 megawatts that are being proposed here. The distances involved, it's been mentioned a few times that distance is your friend when it comes to radiation. I think it's the square of the distance, if I remember correctly. In some areas, especially along the causeway and the culvert, I think these cables are going to be 3 feet below the surface. That's very close distance. So that I think this is unprecedented. It's certainly unprecedented in the US. I think we're looking at a brand new experiment that Barnstable is going to be beginning for them.
You want to take the first question first and then go to the second?
Yes, thank you for the 2 questions. The topic of electromagnetic interference with medical devices such as pacemakers, that is something that's been extensively researched. There are guidelines, essentially, from my understanding, devices such as a pacemaker, they're tested down to levels, I believe, as low as about 1,000 milligauss, which is a very high magnetic field level to make sure that they don't malfunction. And my understanding is that medical devices have also changed, in pacemakers in particular. I believe they were more prone to potential electromagnetic interference in the past. I believe that they've, the shielding has been improved, the design has been changed, but they are tested. There is I believe ACGIH, the American Conference of Industrial Hygienists, has a specific magnetic field guideline level for medical devices. That level is 1,000 milligauss, which is much higher than any of the magnetic field levels that we've modeled for this project, including directly above the cables. I believe that FDA also has a database where they track different issues, problems with medical devices. I'm not aware that an issue associated with a power transmission line. I'm not aware that there is such an entry in that database that's been observed in the real world. In terms of the second question, I think there was a lot packed in there. In terms of the 1,200 megawatts, I mean, that's being split among 3 different circuits. We've modeled, each of the circuits. The magnetic fields that we're modeling, those are, I mean, number one, they're well below health-based exposure guidelines. They're ICNIRP, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, has a magnetic field health-based exposure guideline of 2,000 milligauss for the general public. What we're modeling is well below that guideline level. In terms of, I mean, as I mentioned, power frequency EMFs have been extensively studied over pretty much the last 4 decades. There are thousands of publications, millions of dollars of research, a number of different study types. And the magnetic fields that we're modeling, I mean, levels like that, those have been part of these studies. They've been part of experimental animal studies, cellular studies, epidemiological studies. The magnetic field levels that we're seeing here are not different than those that have been extensively studied.
So there are studies that have looked at EMF generation by cables of this magnitude.
Cables that have these above ground magnetic field levels, yes.
Wait, but you keep using the word model, okay? From my understanding, modeling means it doesn't exist, and you're extrapolating, you're giving a number of facts, and you're predicting based on certain information. It's not like you've actually gone and measured an existing installation. Is that correct?
Well, a modeling study is typical for a project like this because that's all that we can do. The project hasn't been built. But in terms of these types of modeling analyses, they rely on Maxwell's equations. They're very, very accurate based on the information that goes into them. And it's a small amount of information. You need to know the electrical current on the cables, which we erred on the side of being conservative, assuming 100% capacity of the wind farm. You need to be able to locate, where the conductors are, how far below ground. The modeling is very precise.
I understand that because I'm in the business, but that's why I wanted to say, let's have information sessions that are targeted, because not everybody can understand what you're saying. I mean, what you're saying is very important to us. So I'd like to just say, like I said, let's talk about one thing, and then the next meeting, talk about something else.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah.
And I just want to give a quick reminder. To folks on Zoom too. Yeah, you can ask questions by both raising the hand, using the raise hand icon, or also submitting a question through the Q&A. We haven't had any so far, but just wanted to make sure we remember that you're there. I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
So I have 2 questions more related to project logistics. So the cable comes on the land for the horizontal drilling process. It's then migrated north through Osterville, the rest of Barnstable, as I understand it, coordinated with the town's infrastructure related to sewers and so forth, streetscape and all that. When it gets to the northern part of Barnstable, as I understand it, it's connected to a substation up there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does that substation exist?
The West Barnstable Eversource substation. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Aaron. Yeah.
That's the destination.
Yes.
And the other 2 landfalls in Centerville and Venice, same thing?
Yes.
Okay, so when they get to that substation, is that power now distributed to the normal smart grid infrastructure?
the project more or less end at that point.
Yeah, it goes into
Yeah.
the grid and it gets distributed through the grid.
Okay, and that serves all of the Cape?
All of the Cape and transmits electricity to other parts of Massachusetts as well.
Okay, so somebody lives in Mashpee, the only benefit they get, I assume, is gonna be a lower rate at some point.
Well, someone who lives in Mass P will get lower electric rates because the cost of wind power is less than the alternative, which is natural gas.
Yeah.
But there's also, we're making a huge investment as part of this upgrade in the overall reliability of the electric system on Cape Cod. And so everyone on Cape Cod will benefit from that. And then if you're someone who cares about the actual electricity that's powering your home, you're getting clean energy that's powering your home. So it's a variety of benefits.
Okay, but a couple of the related questions, more from a business standpoint. What percentage of this project is currently funded? Approved?
I'm sorry, I'm not being cagey. I don't know what you mean. Can you restate it?
Well, project cost X, I'm not sure what the total cost is. Has it been funded by the federal, state, local governments?
No, we're gonna be funding this project from a combination of debt and equity financing. And we're in this permitting stage now. When that's done, we will go and have a financial closing where equity partners will put in some of the funding and banks will put in some of the funding, but that hasn't happened yet.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Somewhat of a similar question. I know on that financial sheet, the local village section was like to be determined. Is there like possible utility tax deductions that could come from this project for like local residents or?
Ken?
Tax deductions?
Yeah, so based on like people that are impacted by the construction going on, are there tax deductions that could result from this, or, you know, from the power that's generated within the taxpayers area, are there?
I don't think there's tax deductions. What we have said, for example, though, to businesses along Main Street, if because of the work that we're doing, they suffer a revenue loss, that's something that we're definitely willing to talk to businesses about compensation. We do think that the 110 to 130 million net present value is a compensation to the town and its residents in general for the disruption and the inconvenience. That's a way that can offset what otherwise might be paid in property taxes, depending upon what the town wants to do with the money.
Oh, is there anything you want to add there? Oh, okay, great. My apologies.
I have a couple questions quickly. You showed what the benefits to the town financially would be. What percentage of that, what percentage is that of the total profits that are projected for this project for Avenue in general?
Okay, have you come back up, Ken?
Yeah, I'm just gonna come up to say, I have no idea.
How about a ballpark figure?
I wouldn't even
I'm
speculate.
sure you have some kind of.
No, as you know, we're currently in a restructuring of the contract, so until that's done, I couldn't possibly answer that.
Okay, I've got another question.
I'll stick there.
You said you have a project down off the coast of North Carolina called the Kitty Hawk. Just to err on the side of caution, being here the Barnstable resident, has any of the Barnstable officials tried to have you land those transmission lines here in Barnstable also?
Sorry, John, I don't understand your question. Try it again. What?
Have the town of Barnstable try to coax you to land those lines?
Oh, you're being facetious. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I want to know if you guys can basically understand or empathize with the, if you are in fact renegotiating contracts, you want to do it based on what was stasis at the time, right? The price per whatever, yeah, you make your money. And war starts in Ukraine and you can't get out of that. Don't you understand why people in this room, many of us might be thinking, you know, the geopolitical future is not getting any tamer, as far as I can see. And if you can't handle financial impact of a war somewhere, how are you going to be able to? How are you going to be able to withstand this? How are you able to make accurate predictions?
Sure.
to your shareholders, whatnot. I mean, other geopolitical things are going to happen within this project. What happens when you ain't making money?
Sure, so that's a perfectly fair question. It's true that when we bid this project, we didn't foresee the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which wreaked havoc on steel. We didn't foresee inflation at a level that we haven't seen for 40 years. We didn't see the Federal Reserve raise interest rates by 4%. Well, let me just finish. And the problem is that the contract that we signed and others signed back in that era had no flexibility in it. It was just kind of this price, doesn't matter what happens in the world. That was a mistake, actually, on our part, but I would also say on the part of the utilities, because I think what we need to do in a world that's changing is to build some resilience and flexibility into it. So we're not going to do that again. And if you look at what the state is talking about how it's going to do contracts in the future, they're going to be built with some flexibility mechanisms to allow. So if things change, and that can go in both directions, by the way. Costs can come down, the ratepayer should get the benefit of that.
Many in this room can probably, unfortunately, remember interest rates at like 18%.
Yeah, like
With inflation.
30 years ago. It can happen, exactly. Exactly.
So it's going to happen.
And again, the problem is the contracts that were signed didn't build in any mechanisms to deal with that. So this is something that's not just about our project, it's happening across the world, actually, with wind
It's happening
energy.
on our beach.
But the ultimate answer to your question is, our goal, it will be to come up with a revised contract that we know we can do this project, and it will go through very exacting scrutiny, and there will be penalties associated with non-performance. And ultimately, for the banks and the equity lenders to provide that funds, they're gonna have to be convinced that at the prices that we've agreed to in the contract, the revenues are sufficient. So that's the basic answer. And then on top of that, we have insurance policies. So if there's a natural disaster and we can't generate, we'll be insured for that. So there's a variety of ways that we will be able to perform in this contract.
When you get to West Barnstable, how many acres of trees are going to be taken down to build your substation? And when you communicate with the Cape Cod Commission, which I did today, because you told me you had spoken to some people at the Cape Cod Commission, they want you to replace those acres of trees with other acres of trees. I assume those acres will be in the village of West Barnstable, where you took down the original acres and not in another village or another town. Would that be correct?
Yep, so just for folks on Zoom, this question is about the substation site.
Yeah, great question. So I don't know the exact amount of acres, but there will be a number of acres of tree clearing. Let me just talk about what that substation is and why we need it. So, and I think another gentleman, you sort of spoke about each of these projects where they're going. So just to go through each one. So Vineyard Wind 1 is ultimately plugging in its power to the Hyannis substation for Eversource in the Independence Park area, right by Route 6. They're building an interim substation to filter that power for that project right off of Communications Way in Independence Park, where the old Cape Cod Times production facility used to be. But the second project, Park City Wind, landing at Craigville Beach, where we have a land agreement to build a substation at 8 Shoot Flying Hill Road, right by where the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce's office is, right off of exit 6. And then once that power is filtered there, it's then going to head up to the Eversource West Barnstable substation, which is if you go up Oak Street and cross over the ramp over Route 6, that's on your right if you're heading north on Oak Street. For Commonwealth Wind, we are proposing to build an interim filtering substation for that project on the other side of Oak Street, basically if you're going north to the west. And what is currently sort of forested land and privately owned land. In looking for the substation site, we had a couple of factors. So ideally, we wanted a commercially disturbed parcel that we could acquire rights to that was not near people's homes, so that we could put sound walling around it and build a substation that is not going to cause sound and lighting nuisance to people. We looked at a number of locations. throughout, especially Marston's Mills and West Barnstable, through the potential 2 project routes for this coming from Osterville. And we look extensively at a number of sites. Unfortunately, we could not find a commercially disturbed parcel that could meet the needs. So that was not something we could secure, but we could secure this area and parcels of privately owned land that is not near people's existing homes, and not near any, especially any, major neighborhoods. So there will be tree clearing involved with this potential substation location. But thankfully it is right across proximate to the existing Eversource substation. And to the existing power lines right of way, in that area, right near Plum Street, in West Barnstable. Lastly, your question of, yes, the Cape Cod Commission has a policy of no net loss or of replacing any sort of land that is cleared for a commercial purpose, for putting that land into conservation or to an entity like the Barnstable Land Trust. We're actively been having those conversations with the Park City Wind project, because we're starting the Cape Cod Commission hearing process for that project on March 7th, on securing land that we could put into conservation for some tree clearing we need to do on the Shootflying Hill Road property for that substation. We have not yet started Cape Cod Commission process. We have filed with them. That's probably another year or 2 away. So that will be probably a year or so. I don't know exactly when we'll file, but we haven't filed with them yet. But yes, it's under the regulations of the Cape Cod Commission, we will have to find land to put into conservation. Where that will be in town, the Cape Cod Commission has specific policies on that, of requiring, if you serve upland, you need to find upland property to put in conservation. You can't in many cases have wetland properties or replacing upland properties. There's some other pieces on it as well. I don't know if they have a specific geographic by village within a town for finding parcels to mitigate. But I could look into that, but that really would be dictated, the parameters of what we'd be required to secure for offsetting land to put into conservation would be dictated by them.
Where he's talking with this substation is over the aquifer, just like the other one is in Barnstable. And the cables that you're using, which you still haven't tested what the temperature of those cables are. They are going to heat up the earth as they go through, and they're going through 2 wells and up to our waterway. Now, the temperature is dispersed. I have a whole study on temperature of the cables that was done in England. And they do disperse a little out to the water, but they go through the sand and the dirt, and they're going to heat up our water supply. Now, when you heat up the water supply, you're going to have an increased bacteria count. So there's a high risk that you're going to ruin the water supply here that we're trying to protect. And the sewer systems that you're proposing, you're not really gonna, 1% of what you're gonna, the cost of those. When I was told that we have money in the infrastructure bill by Senator Markey's aide that was supposed to be here tonight, for the sewers for the entire pit. That money needs to be secured. I want to know why it's not secured. Senator Kennedy would have already had that done. So I want Senator Markey to get down here and do his job. But we're not protecting the water supply. You think this is going to be great for the water, because of the sewer, but it's going to destroy the water by the increased temperature and the bacteria count.
Well, there are a couple questions there. So
That's all unknown, isn't it? Because we haven't decided what the temperature increase is going to be from these cables that are going through the entire town.
So
This is a real damaging situation.
Let me answer 2 parts, and then I'd like Ken Fitzgerald to talk about your question on the water mains. So the first question you asked is the parcel west of Oak Street that we're looking at for the substation. What zone is it in? The town has different wellhead protection districts or aquifer protection districts at different types. I believe, I don't know, Aaron, if anybody remembers the exact name of that type of, for that particular parcel, it is named one of those protection districts. Well, thank you, Suzanne. And that is, I believe, was mentioned in the town's ENF comment letter for our NEPA process. We have discussed that parcel with both the Barnstable Fire Water District, which has a budding parcel they own, but it's actually within the West Barnstable Fire Water District, At this time, there's no plans by those water districts or by the town to site a drinking water well at that location. Folks might have followed maybe about a year or so ago. The town council and the town in general was looking extensively at new locations for water well locations within, especially in the West Barnstable area. I don't believe they actually looked at this particular parcel or area that's called the Clay Hill area of West Barnstable. They've decided to focus on siting one or multiple drinking water wells in the Bridge Street conservation area in West Barnstable, which is right behind the West Barnstable firehouse, which I think is on Meeting House Way. So that there, we've had conversations about that in terms of what we're planning doesn't interfere with any potential future siting of any public drinking water wells. There was one other thing you mentioned, but I can't recall. But Ken, do you want to talk about the drinking, the water mains for the common water? I don't know if you have anything on that.
Right, the design is at the earliest stages. First of all, to address your question directly, the duck bank is approximately 3 feet below grade, and I believe the heat will dissipate before it ever gets near the aquifer. Regarding the water mains, we're at the very earliest stages now in starting to communicate with the interfacing utilities, whether it's the water supply company or the natural gas company, as we advance our design a little bit on the duck bank and gain more information. We'll be entering into discussions with those interfacing utilities to confirm a technically acceptable coexistence of water mains and natural gas pipes, and ensuring that the final installation will be safe and appropriate. Yes, sir.
Yeah, excuse me. Kitty Hansen, I talked with Craig Blocker, the water superintendent
Yes,
down in Barnstable, for Com. And the water mains they ran on Strawberry Hill Road from the original Park City project, that anything closer than 10 feet to those cables had to be insulated. So if the heat's not a factor, why do those pipes have to be insulated if they're closer than 10 feet from the cable?
Very good question.
Why did it take like 3 months to get an answer on the heat coming off the cable? That should be a basic question.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
let's talk about the process that will take place. As part of that process, the models will continue to be developed, establishing heat profile, isotherms propagating from the duct bank. Armed with those data, we'll be in communication and coordination with the interfacing utilities. And you're right, the way to solve the question on the water mains is either to relocate them or insulate them or do both. So when Vineyard Wind 1, that was the solution. So I suspect there'll be some degree of that for this Commonwealth wind project. That is the way of ensuring that the water mains are placed in an appropriate and safe temperature regime that's acceptable to the water company.
And you remember I just want to add, especially Pete, I know putting on your calm water hat, we met with Craig late last year to get the specific sort of opening, I would say what Craig's expectations are for both routes, and to get to have some factual information for the calm water district of what is older 1930s and 40s era cast iron water mains within the town, which primarily for both Park City and Commonwealth is everything south of 28. Most of the main roads we're considering for both the two potential Commonwealth wind routes and for the Park City route are everything south of 28 for the most part in our potential routes. So that old water main that needs to be replaced. So we got some information from Craig and are planning to schedule meetings with him and possibly with you and some of your fellow calm water commissioners and member of the Prudential Commission to discuss that and negotiate further an agreement like calm water has with Vineyard Wind. Okay, understood. So thank you, Pete. So ma'am, you had another question that I want to get back to you on. So you talked about Senator Markey, and I don't know if Ben Thomas, Senator Markey's office, you may be on Zoom. But if Ben, please identify yourself if you'd like to speak. But I would really recommend you and others watch the January 19th Barnstable Town Council meeting. At the very end of the meeting, there was a presentation from your town finance director, Mark Milne, that talked about this potential request that the town council might put forward for a debt exclusion override. But he also talked in specific the town council of what exactly the town is getting from state revenue sources, from the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund that's funded by the excise tax on short-term rentals and the room occupancy tax, and what the town is getting from the two major federal bills, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed in the last couple of years. As Director Milne described it, all of those funds from the federal government are going to the existing state revolving fund that the town uses to take loans out to do sewer projects. And the town is getting sort of a subsidy and percentage points on those loans, but they still have to take out the loans, which still presents a cash flow problem that the town isn't being given checks by the federal government to pay for the sewer projects. They're being given subsidy and some percentages on loans that they still need to take out, which means that the town still needs to come up with cash to do the projects. It can only take on so much debt for the state revolving fund. So certainly, I just think for you as a Barnstable resident, I'd recommend you watch that. There's also a presentation from Director Miller on the town council's website under town council presentations that details that exactly what pots of money from your town are going into the comprehensive wastewater management plan. So that might be helpful for your question.
70 years of damage, so.
We just want to take a question on Zoom as well, because we have one in. So Steve, do you want to read that question for us?
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. From Shelby, why are you not looking to land this cable in a more industrial area? Why pick a fragile beach?
Sure, thanks for the question, Shelby. So for any project, offshore wind project of this type, the dictating factor is you need to be able to secure rights to plug in to a substation. We only have 2 queue positions, as they're called, where we're the first in line for a substation interconnect for the Commonwealth Wind Project. 1,200 megawatts at the West Barnstable substation, and only 400 megawatts, only enough for a third of the power at a small substation at Cushnet, Mass, which is a small town right next to New Bedford. We don't have any other substation interconnection points. A lot of folks talk about Brayton Point. Brayton Point doesn't have the ability to take several large projects, but the total capacity at that particular substation is owned. The first, second, and third queue positions are owned by Mayflower Wind, now called South Coast Wind, and another company called Equinor. There's no ability for us to secure any interconnection opportunity there. It's already been sold and purchased and held by some of our competitors, to be frank. Other offshore wind companies own other potential feasible locations in the South Coast area, in Rhode Island, and I would just point that oftentimes there's people also talk about the Cape Cod Canal. There's a story that came out that the company that's purchased the Cape Cod Canal or now it's a natural gas oil plant as a peaker plant is interested in future offshore wind projects interconnecting there. The challenge is you can't, according to current federal guidelines, you can't permit installations of cables through dredged areas, especially within canals and under bridges. So you see that case in point with the Mayflower South Coast Wind Project going to Brayton Point, Somerset. They don't have a water-only route to get to Somerset. They have to cross through Portsmouth, Rhode Island. They have to cross at a beach location across a portion of Aquidneck Island or Portsmouth, Rhode Island, to then go back underwater and come up to Brayton Point. So unfortunately, land crossings are not are likely going to be possible for many routes, and for anybody maybe who would like to eventually purchase the ability to use the substation at the canal plant, they're probably going to need to land in Mashpee or Falmouth and go an onshore route and cause road construction for miles and miles to get to that location. So just keep that in mind, that as folks are talking about alternatives, that many of these alternatives that are being discussed aren't necessarily actually options where there's a water-only route to that location.
Thank you, Shelby. Stephen, I just want to check in. Is that we have one more question through Zoom, or is that the same one?
That's it for now.
Great, thank you so much. Yes.
So the infrastructure for this proposed project sounds really complicated and potentially hazardous. Clean energy sounds good to the end user, but as we all know, ocean-based wind power is not the only clean energy source. 700,000 homes at 2.5 people per home, that's 1.75 million people to be benefited from this. That's really not a lot at all. They already have electricity. I get petitioned many times a year that I can sign up through a different company, through different source, get 100% clean energy. I can already do that by switching over. So my question is, isn't community-based solar far superior solution to clean energy production than this majorly environmentally sketchy, for-profit idea in our village?
Yay. I'm happy to talk about the merits of community solar versus offshore wind, but I do have to say, I don't share your premise that this is an environmentally sketchy endeavor. It's not. No, I'm just telling you, I don't want to get in an argument with you. I'm not accepting the premise of your question.
Yeah.
We need a lot of tools in the toolbox to deal with climate change
I
and
have
transition
solar
to
panels on
clean
my roof.
energy. It's not just about replacing the existing natural gas and coal burning power plants with clean energy. We're also probably, most experts say, we're going to have to double or triple the amount of electricity we generate, because the next big challenge is to run our cars and our homes and all sorts of devices on clean electricity. So we have a massive expansion of the grid we have to do. We're also experiencing in Massachusetts the closing of some power plants. Pilgrim is shut down. There's natural gas fired power plants in Boston that are closing down. So there's an enormous need to transition the grid to clean energy and to expand it. Community solar absolutely has a role. I personally tried to put solar panels on my roof, but it got analyzed, it wouldn't work. So I participate in community solar. It's great. Solar energy is gonna be a piece of the clean energy future, but there is nothing to compare to the scale of clean energy that offshore wind can provide in this part of the country. If you're in the middle of the country and, North Dakota, you can build really big onshore wind that gets at that. But here in the Northeast, we're so space constrained. Offshore wind is going to be an essential part of it. And if you look at the Commonwealth's climate plan and that of other states, they're talking about getting 50 to 60% of energy from offshore wind by about 2050. So I think the answer is we need both.
Thank you. I think the answer is we should be doing hydropower.
We need that too.
Yeah.
If we accept what you just said, the climate, we are in dire peril, okay? Okay, I can't think of any other historic infrastructure project in this country. Let's take the Tennessee Valley Authority, under Roosevelt, that has been bid out to several contractors. One gets one beach, go 5 miles down, there's another company 5 miles down. I've never seen anything done this way. If we are facing such an imminent threat, wouldn't you think the government would act in a way that Franklin Roosevelt did and do it in that fashion? This is like the Wild West. This is wild path drilling in Texas. This is nonsensical.
That's exactly.
That's a great question. I do think there are other ways.
Please, you wouldn't work for this company to get involved that.
No, hold on a minute. I think as a national policy, given the desperate place we're in climate change, I would like to see the federal government take a much bigger role, akin to what it did when it created an interstate highway system.
Me too.
Or the TVA or things like that. Although the TVA, just so you know, is not a very clean, green. They get most of their power from old coal burning power plants. But there should be a bigger public role, but that's not how it was set up. The way it was set up was the federal government is contributing through tax credits, which are useful and they lower the cost. And the state of Massachusetts passed a law to set up a competitive bidding process for private companies to come in and compete for the rights to build these projects. The company that we're in, Avangrid, is part of a worldwide Iberdrola group, which has tremendous hands-on experience building these projects. So you get the benefit of that expertise.
Or not, right?
I'm sorry.
Your engineering, the people who are doing your mapping the ocean floor are also mapping the ocean floor in the what used to be called Dutch Indonesia or whatever, for oil rigs.
No,
Yeah, they
No.
are.
no. Neither our company nor Iberdrola owns oil rigs.
No, but the company that you're using to map the ocean floor.
Oh, to do the
is also doing
geophysical work?
So on one hand, you have people who are doing work for people who are polluting the atmosphere. On the other, and you're using that same company for your own geological.
I don't wanna-
survey. It's US Geological Survey.
I don't want to get in a big argument with you. If we hire a contractor that knows what they're doing, because they have experience in oil and gas, I don't think that disqualifies them. But
No.
again, your larger point about a bigger role for government in this, I actually agree with you. But that's where we're at.
Is there a way to do the idea that's been thrown around here of the multi-to-one, instead of having 16 lines coming in across every beach, have some concentration point and get some economy of scale over it? Why can't that be thought through? Why can't the government be brought into play about that happens? Even though it might be a year or two delay, do it right. Not just debate every one of these beaches. Right.
It's a great question, sir. So it's something that the state of Massachusetts and other New England states are looking at quite extensively.
How seriously and how soon?
So it's quite simple. So a number of New England states have gotten together and they made an application to the federal government about looking at some type of integrated planned approach, integrated offshore system for multiple offshore wind projects to plug into. And I know a lot of folks, from say Greater Dowson Beach and the OBA have put out studies from Barrick and other companies. So there's a lot of information about this. The state of Massachusetts, and particularly the state's Department of Energy Resources, has looked at it quite a bit. In this last, a bill that the legislature passed in July of 2022, they created a transmission working group that I believe needs to start convening by sometime this spring. I'm not sure if they have yet. April 1st, they need to convene by. I haven't seen anything public from that group yet, but that's been authorized by the legislature. And that commission is looking particularly at this option. Now, if this were to be done, and I used to work in the legislature, so I saw some of this debate and sort of how this has been discussed over the years. The concept most likely would be that the legislature would authorize some type of procurement to be put out by the state, a competitive solicitation, just like they do for offshore wind projects, for a company or multiple companies to bid to create some type of interconnection grid planned to land in a couple of locations in Massachusetts for multiple offshore wind projects to use. That hasn't happened yet. The legislature and different legislators have filed amendments over the years to do that. There's been discussion on it. The consensus to this point has been that either the state is not ready to do that or has not exercised that option thus far. So for our Commonwealth wind project, we are abiding by that bid and what that bid called for. And the bid called for us to develop for qualified entities that own lease areas for offshore wind turbines from the federal government to propose building an offshore wind farm and sell that power to the utility companies in Massachusetts. And as part of that, to build their own transmission infrastructure permitted by federal and state agencies at a substation where they can secure the ability to interconnect to. So that's exactly what we've done. Those are the rules of the road for now. The questions about the future are going to be up to your legislators and to Governor Healy. The last thing I want to say on this, sir, is I hear some talk, especially, some different, conversation in the village of that the 2030 deadline for carbon emission reductions in Massachusetts is flexible, is not real, is a target. That's not true. That is not true. There's a bill that passed, the Roadmap Act, that passed the legislature and was signed by Governor Baker into law in March of 2021 that has hard caps.
That can change.
No,
We're using that as an excuse to try to.
No, sir.
Why don't you guys, instead of hitting the brick wall from a group of thousands of people in Osterville opposing this, turn this thing on its ear and become the sponsor for this multi-to-one approach and lead the way, and we'll back you.
We're trying to build an offshore wind project to bring clean electricity to the state of Massachusetts and get our state off of carbon emissions. And the state legislature and our previous governor, and it's the stated policy of our new governor, are aiming full steam ahead at a carbon reductions emission deadline by 2030. And our project is going to help make that happen.
Just invade a village.
Excuse me, are you exploring any other possibilities besides houses?
As a parent, I don't think we be able to alter.
What's gonna happen if it doesn't go through? What happens?
We've looked at a lot of alternatives. We highlighted in a summary fashion in our environmental notification form, exactly which ones we looked at and what they were lacking. In the draft environmental impact report, which will come out, what, April, May timeframe? We'll have a much more elaborate description of all the places we looked at, what the pros and cons were, and again, why we picked Dowson's Beach. But the long, go ahead.
So you have no other option on the table.
We have no other option on the
So
table.
it's Dows's, if you don't have Park City, are they contingent on one another?
No, the two projects are not contingent upon one another.
So if you can't land at Dows's, it's all done.
No, anyway, I don't want to engage in
He doesn't want to
hypotheticals.
think about that.
Susan?
Yeah, the town hasn't voted, but I just point out that you looked at, I believe the count is 9 locations only in the town of Barnstable. 2 of them you rejected out of hand because they're estuaries. Dows's is a major watershed and an estuary, so we don't know why you think this is an appropriate place to land us. The outcry from your plan to invade this beach and this village is huge. I don't think you understand how much the people of this town don't want you to ruin one of the most beautiful spots. And before I stop, let me say this. It's not like you're here for 2 years and then you're gone, or we get our beach back. Because we're gonna have 3 gigantic vaults in the parking lot that will be constantly, and I think somebody said this or wrote this in your cop, that you need to access them, or whatever company does this, for maintenance and repair. The fiber optic cables that accompany the copper part of the transmission line get ruined by the heat. So you get signals saying, this needs to be fixed. You're gonna be there, someone's gonna be there with utility trucks and barges offshore fixing these cables for the next 25 years. So you're turning our beach into an infrastructure. And that's why we hate this so much.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
And there were 2 pieces there, the alternatives and then also kind of the cable and, or the joint basin in the parking lot and what that kind of long-term maintenance looks like. So I don't know, Erin, if you want to speak to the alternatives a little bit?
Yeah, so in terms of the estuary, the characteristic about estuaries that makes it, less preferable than Dows's Beach is that the water depths offshore make it inaccessible for HGV.
That's
And
got nothing to do with the estuary.
yes, so we want to use HCD to avoid any open trenching within nearshore coastal resources. So in order to use HCD, we have to have a certain water depth offshore. And we have to have a certain area to stage the equipment. So what some of the criteria we used to dismiss other sites was having that staging area, so we could use HCD. HCD is what allows us to avoid really impactful wetlands impacts, like open trenching, straight through a beach or through an estuary, because there's some, major impactful impacts associated with that. So those are the criteria that, we'll have those all lined up in our DEIR of all the sites we looked at, and how we sort of whittled them down and, hear you on Dows's Beach, and we're looking and we're gonna provide all the engineering analysis that we need to show you that it is, the best option.
It's not the best option.
Yeah.
Yes, the electrical circuits will include power cables that we talked about earlier and communication through fiber optic.
It gets ruined from the heat.
Let's talk about that. Fiber optic is a common technology. It's tried and true. We have fiber optic cables that run through power plants, including boiler houses. A boiler house could be an ambient temperature of 120 degrees and they withstand the conditions. So the cables, all the infrastructure that goes along with it will be designed for the expected conditions. But I can tell you that fiber optic cables run through power plants today that are way hotter than any conditions that this duct bank is going to see.
Well, respectfully, I've been reading an awful lot about the maintenance and repair of electrical export cables in Europe. Now, I know you'll probably say, well, we've got good cables. I'm pretty sure you're gonna be using the same, high-tech cables that they're using in the latest installations in Europe, and they're having problems with them. Being ruined, the fiber optics are constantly saying there's a problem here. Can you speak to the constant maintenance and repairs?
Well, yes, I'll speak to that. We're not anticipating a frequent maintenance or repair to the power cables or the communication cables. We would be remiss in a design to not give ourselves the provisions to be able to do those repairs, but we do not anticipate that they're going to be frequent by any means. Now, to your point about what's going on wind farms in Europe, we have two things going on. One is lessons learned. That we've implemented a program, companies have implemented a program that they're incorporating lessons learned from Vineyard One, from Park City Wind, it gets fed into Commonwealth Wind. One step better than that, as Ken had said, Avangrid has a battery of offshore wind projects that are in Europe. So we'll take those lessons learned, incorporate them within the design as part of our normal process.
Now, all of this project that you're thinking and hoping is gonna happen, all depends on a zoning change. Right now, unless they did it in secret, like they did before, with Koval and Craigville, they did that in their secret meetings and filed to the state legislature for a zoning change from recreation and bathing to commercial industrial. And that has to be done, filed by the state. Now, we have made it perfectly clear to our selectmen that we expect them not to vote for that. And if they do, fine, we'll get rid of them next year when they're all up for election. But the point is, you can't do any of this without a zoning change. So that's the key to the whole thing, is getting a zoning change passed by the legislature. And you slipped that through during COVID last time, but we're all a little awake now. And we're gonna make sure that our 13 people do not vote to have our legislator go up and file for a zoning change. So you can do all this you want, but if that happens, there's gonna be war here, I'm telling you. Because the big thing that's gonna happen here, 230 million is our budget. All right, for the town. Osterville pays over 50% of that money. I cannot get out of anybody because nobody wants to really tell me the real number, but I'm gonna find it out. And what do you think is gonna happen to our values when you dig up the entire town? First of all, you're gonna bankrupt all of these businesses. They're not gonna get their business tax. And all that money that you think you're paying, we would be paying that in our taxes that we already contribute to this town. So it's a minuscule amount of money into the damage you're gonna do. Plus the fact of what damage you're gonna do to increase the temperatures of our water.
Okay, a couple of things. I'm not gonna get everyone thing we just said. The impacts to the business district from the electric cable are temporary. You're talking about.
3 years,
Hold on,
3
hold on.
years.
You're talking about one construction season going through the business district. We've also talked to the business district. If they suffer, that work's gonna be done, in a time period when you have less foot traffic, but we've said, hold on. May I finish?
My own business in this village. I've never known about any.
We have had those conversations. Pat can tell you, but let me finish my thought. Because if I get disconnected, then I forget what I was gonna say. So we have said publicly that we will provide compensation to businesses who suffer losses due to our project. There is no permanent property devaluation from this project. In fact, hold on, just the opposite is gonna be the case, because our project, you know what? I listened very patiently to you when you were talking. I didn't interrupt you. So I'd like to finish my thought. Having a sewer line going through the town, going through Osterville, will absolutely increase property values. You are facing quite a ticking time bomb with these DEP regulations that are going to require homeowners to retrofit their existing septic system at enormous cost. The sewer line and the acceleration of it will save homeowners from having to do that cost and will make their properties much more valuable. And you can look it up. Properties with sewer have higher property values. So I just don't share the premise either that we're causing any permanent damage to that beach, other than the temporary inconvenience, for which we are compensating the town. And I don't believe that we're gonna be driving down property values. We're gonna be providing $100 million plus of in-kind and other revenue to the town.
It's not enough money.
I did want to just say, first of all, ma'am, we're grateful to meet with you. If I give you contact information afterwards, or if I can give you my business card, I'd be glad to meet. We were invited by the Osterville Business and Professional Association last June to attend their meeting by Jen Williams and Dale Nightingale. We've had other meetings. I've reached out to every business owner that I can find, particularly those who have on Wieno Ave or Main Street on the potential routes or is one of two potential route options for the project. And I've had a number of meetings with business owners directly. If you would like to meet, I would be glad to meet. I'm going to be continuing to do another round of outreach. I know who I may have missed to businesses, and we'd be glad to have conversations, and we're glad to come back before the OBPA if we're invited.
Absolutely.
I have two questions. One, who negotiates the financial benefits to the town? With our town finance director?
In the prior two ones, it was with the town manager. And the town manager got authorization from the town council to negotiate those.
And given everything that you hear with having this regard, be willing to significantly increase the compensation to the town, given the amount of unknown risks, disruption, potential loss of value, so on, that we don't, obviously people have stated a lot of concerns. We don't know, I mean, I don't know if they're real or not real, but there's certainly a lot of concerns, and it seems like whatever the number is, I've heard enormous benefit from the lobbying. You projected this, and thank you for your experience, but over 30 years, I mean, probably the lifespan of these windmills in the last 30 years. You're gonna need additional repair, so even if it's $2 million a year, that's nothing to what is happening to our beloved village. I would just bought a house here and just invested in this community. I would never have bought here if I knew this about it. Right.
Well, look,
Right.
we want to treat the town fairly. We look to the town for guidance on what it considers to be fair. But as we've also said at many public meetings, we also recognize that the village is special. It has its own unique value, and we would like to engage in a discussion about something at the village level that would be significant as well.
I mean, given the importance of this project, and I understand renewable, and as you stated, this is so important. I understand the political implications of this as well. You're asking this village to take on an enormous responsibility with very little competition.
I have a question. After you supposedly land these 3 cables, in 5 more years, you're gonna land 3 more cables at Dawson?
No. Just so you understand, we have that lease area that Rachel showed. The lease area will be done. We
3
won't,
cables and that's it.
we won't have the capacity to land any more cables in Barnstable. The other thing you should know is, I believe that we're tapping out the capacity of the West Barnstable substation, the Eversource station, to take any more electricity. So I think I can safely say from our point of view, that's it. No more cables. But I don't even think another company can connect to Barnstable.
And just to validate that, at the earnings call on February 14th, the Q4 earnings call for Eversource on February 14th, they stated that in addition to Vineyard Wind and Park City Wind, there's 1,200 more megawatts of capacity than the Eversource system on Cape Cod, which we are planning to fill with Commonwealth Wind, and that would be the remainder of the capacity of these substations.
And I would say, additionally to your point as well, when Ken went through the construction staging and showed the 3 construction phases, those 3 different HDDs for those 3 cables. So you can see that took up the majority of the parking lot. So based on the size of those joint bays, also there can be there's no more space in that for more joint bays as well. Yes, sorry.
Can I just ask a quickie question? You mentioned the sewerage and, you know, that we're up against it in Barnstable, the sewage problems happening. Does the town of Barnstable actually have a sewage treatment plant ready to receive all the new waste that will be, you know, with everybody hitching up their houses? And then my son who lives on Miano Avenue, he's gonna have to pay to be able to have his house hitched up. I mean, all the houses will have to pay individually, right? And then is this treatment plant ready for all this?
Yes, it's my understanding, well, I'd say first, Susie, that really is a question for the town, and I especially recommend.
I know.
Reach out to Dan Santos and Griffin Bowden from the town DPW. I have been told by DPW that yes, that the plan for a potential sewer line conceptually, which is currently in phase 2 of the town's comprehensive wastewater management plan, in which the town manager at an August or October meeting of the Osterville Village Association stated that if we choose for Commonwealth Wind, Miano Ave and Main Street and Osterville West Barnstable Road as our roadway choice, that the town would put in a sewer line simultaneous with our construction. The town would move up. That was a statement made by the town manager. As it's been explained to me, the town's conceptual plan would that the sewer line would come down south from 28 down Osterville West Barnstable Road, proceeding down to Main Street and into Osterville Village Center, and that the treatment would go to the existing town wastewater treatment facility behind the DPW office on 28 in Hyannis, and that's where the effluent would go. But that's just what I was told several months back. I would strongly recommend that, you know, you get factual information from the town on that.
All right, Mark.
Just before we go into a couple more questions, we are happy to stay and we'll continue to take questions. I do just want to give a note that it's 6:58 and the library's been kind enough to let us stay till 7. We will stay after 7 to take a couple more questions, but I did just want to flag that for folks. Yep.
So I was very interested in the financial analysis. Patrick, you already have an email from me, but I'd like to see the details behind that list of numbers. So because you talked about net present value, and that's very interesting, but I'd be interested to see what years you put some of those cash flows into. So if you could share that, that would be great in addition to the slide there. But I think to use a 3% discount rate, when you're the 4th tier, when CW LLC is a 4th tier subsidiary of a BBB credit, the more realistic discount rate is 9 or 10%. And that would push your, whatever the number was, 70 to 110 in NPV down to 20 to 30. So you know, again, I'm not sure this is the place to debate discount rates, but I think 3% is, you know, and you mentioned it's comparable to the town's borrowing cost. What you want to compare it to is our counterparty risk with a 4th tier limited liability subsidiary for a BBB credit. And that discount rate is more like 10%.
All right, well, you're a formidable man to talk about this with, so I may do this offline with you, but I do want to just make 2 points.
Yeah.
We didn't assume 3%, we gave a range of 3 to 5%.
Right.
I think that if you're discounting $1 15 years later by 10% or 9%, I think that might apply to what models that Wall Street does, but we're talking about a municipality and community benefits, and I'm not prepared to say that someone getting $1 of tax relief in 10 years is 90% less valuable than someone getting that $1 of tax relief right now. I think from a social cost of capital doesn't quite work, but why don't you and I talk offline about this? You can educate me more and we can show you the model that we use to construct.
I'd like
the
to
net
see
present
that
value.
Excel model.
Yeah.
If you're willing to share.
I think probably.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just, this is director notes for the resident, my fellow residents of Osterville, and I appreciate you guys coming here, being professional, putting on presentations, but the fact of the matter is, we're never gonna convince these guys that this project isn't gonna work, or that all of these problems are real. We're never gonna convince them of that. They're never gonna, or to look at somewhere other than Osterville, they're never gonna convince us that this is a great idea. So we need to be talking to our town councilors. I would say these meetings are, as much as we appreciate their wanting to have the dialogue, these meetings are kind of a waste of time, and we should have our town councilors up there and have.
Totally agree.
He left.
By the way, Mark Ellis.
Yeah, and he left.
Mark Ellis will be at our March 7th meeting with the OBA right here at 7 p.m. March 6th.
Okay.
We're also going to try to get Mr. Jenkins, who's our planning department, working to have some explaining to do. And also, like I said, the OBPA voted 100 unanimously against this project coming from the because the gospel business professional. Okay, so even though you're talking, I'm just again. So just wanted to say that.
Yeah, so you're right. Yep. Yeah.
So I would just say this, I'm sort of the outlier here because I think there's a sense in the room that there's only one opinion in town. And I am frankly very excited about this project. And if you think that the town is united in opposition, I have spoken to hundreds of people that are just as excited as I am and are going to talk to their town councils. Now, I'm a recent arrival. I invested in this town in 1984. So I've only been here for 40 years. And I love Dowsers Beach. My kids grew up there, learned to swim there. We have walked that beach in the summer, in the winter, in the fall, year round. And I have the same concern a lot of people here have. But I also spent 10 years as president of the Environmental League of Massachusetts. And I've taken a hard look at all forms of renewable energy and all forms of offshore wind projects. And just this year in our little town of Barnstable that we cherish, we think this is somehow revolutionary. We are in fact way behind the curve of successful offshore wind farms throughout the world. Throughout Scandinavia, which are probably the most environmentally sensitive people in the world, where offshore wind is a tourist attraction. If this town faces its real threat environmentally, which is our septic systems, if anybody's read the 30-year-old reports on this from the Silent Spring Institute, our ponds, our estuaries are all in danger, not from this, but from our septic systems. And if this is going to contribute to the faster construction of septic systems and off-put the cost to us as taxpayers, because I'm on septic.
Yeah,
It's the opposite.
1%.
Well, maybe you're so wealthy that you don't need the money. But for me, millions of dollars. So let me just finish if I may. I just want people in this room to know that there are a lot of us that support the notion of this project. And we were particularly impressed with a very complicated project that not a single shovel is going to go into the ground in Dowsers Beach. That the parking lot and access to the beach will never. And despite the questions that get raised here about certain issues, scientific and others, when endless scientific reports and evaluations are provided, apparently they mean nothing. Well, for many of us who live in this town, it actually means something. We want to preserve Dowsers Beach. We want to preserve Dowsers Beach. We want clean energy. We want a protected beach. We want money to the town. That's just one person's perspective.
Here's number two.
So this gentleman's been waiting, sorry, I know you had your hand up.
I had a question, Chris, for you to blow me over there. On your slide, you went immediately, this is around the health issue. You went right to the World Health Organization. Did I give you a tip? I take that off the slide. Yeah, that's a good point. Now, they still think the virus came from I mean, well, let's be honest. That group is as political as it gets. All right, they were totally wrong on COVID. They didn't go after where the virus came from. They fed all this information. So as soon as I saw that, I just tuned you out.
Thank you. That question?
Yes, great, thank you. Just curious, how many of you either live in Osterville or the town of Barnstable for your vote?
So with a lot of Cape natives speak, and some Cape residents, we have one, colleague on our team that I know who lives in Marston's Mills, John Harker, our fisheries liaison. I don't know of any other members of our team who live in, Barnstable or Osterville. We do have a Yarmouth resident, as well, but in terms of a Barnstable resident, one Barnstable resident I know of. And then a lot of Cape natives like Rachel and myself.
Thank you.
All right, we're at 7:06. I just want to give one more chance, opportunity for folks on Zoom to either raise your hand or submit a question through the Q&A. Okay, thanks. And then are there any kind of final questions in the room? All right, thank you everyone for joining us. So I'm gonna substitute, see if you could end the recording on the Zoom.